A lack of information or training to support work performance is in and of itself a psychosocial hazard. In fact, training may be one of the most essential strategies to improve an organization's physical or psychological safety. We'll speak with an experienced safety trainer who's also bilingual up next on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each episode, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk Psych Health and Safety. Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. It's hard to argue that anything is more effective in addressing physical and psychosocial hazards than providing training. Often the underlying reason that workers get exposed to psychosocial hazards in the first place is due to a lack of understanding of the hazard, an underestimation of the degree to which they're vulnerable to the hazard, and the extent of harm that they'll experience. Unfortunately, organizations tend to look at training as more of a luxury than a strategy when addressing safety and organizational performance. Also, some training programs are well-funded, but poorly executed in that there's an assumption that every worker learns in the same way. This episode, we'll talk to a safety and training professional who knows a thing or two about training. Let's start with an introduction from our guest with this question. Who is Doug Castro?
It's funny you ask that question. I think, at different points in our professional careers and our personal lives, we can define that differently, right? I think these days I'd have to say, really just trying to improve and perfect my craft, and not just health, safety, and environmental, but just all over adult learning. I've learned that standardization is huge. So, as far as not only government standards, but really best practice standards, more than anything else, manufacturer specifications and best practice groups. So, to answer your question, I think in today, I'm going to say a seasoned trainer, and also a lot of respect for standardization, and always a continuous student of best practices in education.
Right on. Absolutely. Yeah. I one of the reasons that we're having this conversation is, at least in the dealings we've had, you're just the consummate training guy to me. When every conversation we have is going to get back to training in some way, shape, or form. And that's why I think this is you're a great person to have this discussion about how important training is as a safety strategy in and of itself. It really is. So, but before we get much deeper into that, though, if I say psychological health and safety, what does that mean to you?
Why do you have to start with a loaded question? I'll be honest with you. I think that, and I thought about it, right? I thought about it before we joined this podcast this past week. And I think that when we say that, a big part of it is acceptance. We're often resistant to training, whether we know we're being resistant to it or not, right? So sometimes it's unconsciously or subconsciously that we're resistant to it because something else takes precedent. Sometimes we just don't want to do it, or we don't want to participate, or we haven't maybe heard so many good things about that particular training. And then, of course, we never have time, right? That's, time and money. I'm convinced that for effective training and education at all levels, and then in our particular case right now, the workplace, I think that money and time are probably the biggest obstructions, but it's also the biggest excuse as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So how does a guy become as excited and interested in training as you are? So how did you start off as wanting to train other people?
I think that many times in our industry, and let me take a step back actually with this, right? So since we do, just like yourself, right, we do a lot of professional development training, consulting work, technical writing. What I've found is that when employees, especially when you have somebody coming out of the crafts, anything like could be scaffold building, millwright, boiler making, it can be somebody like confined space attendant or watch. And many people say, I don't have safety experience, right? And what I've realized is that, or I don't have training experience, since we're speaking specifically about training right now. I think that many of us don't have the responsibility of training on our job, on our resume or our job description, because it's not in the description or we never knew it. But I think that many of us are trainers day in and day out. And I think that's what happened with me, especially being the fact that I speak Spanish and English both. It was often, Doug, help this person out, whether it was Spanish, whether it was English. But in some cases, it was another language I didn't speak. And I'm like, why did you throw me out here? And they're like, well, you already know 2 languages, right? And I'm like, nah, let's, that's marginal, right? But I think what happens is that many times we fall into training and we're the de facto person. And I think that's what happened with me. But to answer that first part of that question, which is the excitement, for me, it's not just health, safety, and environmental anymore. I mean, totally, psychological, right? Behavioral, period. But also it could be things like administrative training too. Communicate soft skills, right? Communication and coordination, crisis management, leadership development. So it doesn't just have to be the hard crafts that we all know often, or emergency response, but it can also be the soft skills as well. And I think what makes me excited is this, Dr. Daniels, and I don't think I've deviated from this in the last few years once I started to discover it. And it was just by chance, I think, that many of us discovered that everything is built on standards and principles. Training standards, right, for adult learning. I really don't think they're much different from child learning. I mean, but I respect the standards. I agree. I just don't agree with the part that, give me a 3rd grader, right, and give me a 30-year-old or 60-year-old adult. I don't think there's much of a difference, with the exception of how much road is behind us and how much road is still in front of us. But other than that, we all want it's the what's in it for me, right? And how can I participate? I think those are the 2 biggest things with training.
Wow, yeah,
and that's why I'm excited.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I mean, I think I kind of stumbled into my first training. I guess I didn't stumble into it. The first thing I ever taught was CPR when I was a young firefighter, because I wanted to actually do better on promotional interviews. Training really wasn't the point, but after you start doing it, you kind of start to like it. And I think there's a personality that is more into it than others. And as you described, after you get tossed into something more and more, you either start to like it or run away from it. There tends not to be a place in the middle. If you get exposed over and over, either you decide, wow, this is actually pretty good, and you start to develop, or you go like, look, I'm out. Don't ever put me in that situation ever again. And I think it's important that we figure out which side of the coin that we're on, because to your point, there are folks who are actually better trainers than they think. And then there are other people who aren't near as good as they think.
Sometimes we're legends in our own mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit, because all of the underlying discussions in most of these podcast episodes are always occupational health and safety related, because that's my connection to psychological safety. If you don't understand physical safety, if you don't understand the concept of safety in general, you're probably not going to get this psychological health and safety thing either, to be quite honest. So that's why, I tend to bounce back and forth and try to get particularly folks in the U.S. to see that let's understand what safety is to begin with. And then let's also convince you that it's not just chemicals and biological hazards. It's also emotional types of things. So what do you think is the connection? If you had to describe the connection between safety and training, how would you describe that?
Ooh. I'm going to give props again, as, many people know, both of us are on the Strategic Advisory Board for Veriforce, right? And our chair, James Junker, I'll give James the credit for this. Him, and it was a safety manager for the U.S. Navy in one of my training classes when I was training for the University of Texas for the OSHA programs. It was a 4-day confined space class or a 3.5-day confined space class. And the first day, we never cracked the standard. We never opened the standard book on the first day. We just had a lot of discussions. We had probably about 8 or 10 people in the class. And towards the end of the day, both of them said, wow, we never touched the standard, but we hit everything in the standard. Mm. And what happened was through discussions, through conversations, and then through showing some examples and pictures or videos, and not just showing them, but actually breaking them down, having roundtable discussions within the group. And I think, and James, this is what James said, and it resonated. And look, and I'm telling you, almost 10 years ago, right? And I still use it. Yeah. So, which is, he says, it's not, he said 2 different things. He said, first of all, it's not the standards. Remember, it's the stories. When it comes to training, it's not the subject matter, it's the stories. And it's true because the stories are relative to the subject matter if we're doing our training properly, right? Sometimes we will get outside of the scope of training, but it's important to bring it back in within the frame. Okay? Mm-hmm. But he also said this, and this is what resonated with me probably the most, which is the education is in the conversation. Yeah. And I'll tell you this, Dr. Daniels, you're asking me who I am these days. I've gone back to the fundamentals of training. I've gone back to ADDIE model. I've gone back to using ANSI and ISO standards significantly in some OSHA. But I've gone back to sometimes we try to get so fancy. And I think many of us are guilty of it because we have to feel like that we're contributing. So I don't think it's necessarily that we're trying to showboat or look more important. I think the thing is that at every level, one person one-ups a little bit more, because we think we have to make things better or bigger. And sometimes just breaking them down to their basic fundamentals and going from there. We're trying to do calculus and try to do long math right now, like division or addition right now. Right. Try to multiply a 3-digit number by a 3-digit number and tell me if we should even be a calculus right now. Right. So I think that, the longer we're in this business, many of us, the further back we take a step and we look more of it at a macro view of the whole situation rather than a microscopic view up front. Right. And I think that comes with time. And I think many of us get there just in different parts of our career. Mm-hmm. If we stay in it, like you said, it's either we're in or we're out. Right. Either you've had enough or you want more, right? Right. It's one or the other. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, so think about how many companies, organizations, what have you, that have this moniker that safety is number one for us. That's our number one priority. But they've never really told people what that really means. I mean, so it's on the T-shirts, it's on the mug, it's on the poster on the wall. But how are people supposed to figure out what that means? And not only what it means for the organization, but processing what it means for the individual. Because people come at this very different. And it's not saying right or wrong. It's safe to you and safe to me may not be the same thing. And listen, I believe that what training does is help give us some kind of common language. So, if you're talking about the difference between an excavation and a trench, or the difference between, a high place and a moderately high place, or the difference between hot and cold. I mean, there's all these otherwise simple words that people interpret differently until you can get them into a training scenario and I really love what you said, is the conversations about this. And it doesn't have to be a lot of long sentences and a lot of, complicated things. It's really simple conversations about safety related topics that just often kind of get missed.
Yes. I couldn't agree with you any more on that. I bring it down to something as basic as this these days, right? We do a lot of standardized test prep. We do leadership development courses like you, right? Right. Technical writing, consulting, training design. If you look at the Safety Management System Directive by OSHA, right? If you look at the 7 core elements, we're looking at, right, leadership and management, employee participation, hazard identification, right? evaluation and control, employee training, inspections and evaluations or audits. And then the last one, OSHA says communication and coordination on multi-employer work sites. I'm going to change that, and I often share this. I say communication and coordination, period, with all personnel, not just on multi-employer work sites. Okay? And the reason I'm going there is this, and you said it, definitions. As far as I'm concerned, right? Commonly accepted practices, which includes definitions, which includes standards, whether they're best practice standards, manufacturer standards, or government standards. So for me, it comes down to give me the definition. Let's find it. And there are a lot of definitions I don't agree with. And there's certain words that I find myself these days using that I don't care for. Okay, like concur and acquiesce. And I don't like these words. I don't. Okay. If I have a problem spelling it, I don't want to use it. Okay. And, if I can't use F7, right, or if I have to use F7 to check it on the computer, there's an issue. Okay. However, this is what I understand is that, and I've come to accept, which is sometimes a word or a few words will give you a shorter explanation of so many other words to express a thought. Like you said, right? Excavation versus trench, especially these days where we're seeing an uptick, right? In cave-ins or rather people being entrapped in cave-ins, right? And fatalities the last few years. Something as basic as an excavation, you stick a spoon. I'll come out here with a teaspoon and I take a little bit of earth. I'm in an excavation. Most of us think a trench is I'm going to dig from my backyard to my front yard so I can put site drainage in. And that's a trench. And it might not be a trench. It has commonly been referred to as a trench, but a trench, by definition by OSHA, is deeper than it is wide, right? You and I agree on this, right?
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
Deeper than it is wide. And if the base of the excavation is wider than 15 feet, it's no longer a trench either. So all trenches are excavations, but not all excavations are trenches. But if we know the definition and we communicate and coordinate on the same level, right. You and I can use one word and say excavations, all of them, but this one, and this one are a trench. But that's because we know the definition.
Right.
And that's where I think training is important. But the problem is we all try to fancy it up. We try to make it better. A lot of times it's lay terms or urban legend. I'm telling you, I know better. And every time I see somebody digging site drainage or have a couple of friends that have site drainage, the fortunate friends, because I don't have site drainage, right? I want site drainage, but I don't have it. Right. And the first thing I look at, and we're talking about, I'm like, well, when y'all dug this trench, and I'm like, hang on, when y'all excavated this dirt,
right?
Because it wasn't a trench, but it's so I'm so used to saying it that I know better, and I still do it, and you know better, and you may or may not do it. But what about people who didn't have the luxury of having that definition, or not only that, but the cone of retention? How much did you actually take in and how much actually stayed?
Right. Right.
So a lot of it comes back to repetition. And I think that's where I think it helps the workforce, right? And I think we're still challenged is that annual training, we say, oh, it's boring. It's over and over and over again. Most of it is not even required, right? I think as you and I agree, HAZWOPER, let's say with OSHA, for example, HAZWOPER, respiratory protection. Other than that, I don't even know of any other training that's annually required unless something changes, right? Either the product changes or the chemical equipment.
Well, you could probably put bloodborne pathogen in that category. But we're very short list.
Awesome, right? Okay, but what happens is that most of it has become industry standard. So everybody, H2S, right? Not all HAZCOM, but H2S because of Texas Railroad Rule 36. So what happens is that because we train HAZCOM every year in states where there's a risk of H2S, and really it's because of Texas that did that, because of the Railroad Commission. Now we normally do HAZCOM every year but that's more client-driven or employer-driven than it's not government mandated. Right. So it's things like that, so I think it's good that there's an overabundance of annual training for the ones that are getting it because it becomes repetition. But what about the ones that aren't getting it now?
Right.
So that's where I'm going with that, right? Is that, it could be beneficial to an employer in the workforce, or it could not be beneficial to an employer workforce. But it also goes back to us as trainers. I share this often, right? And whenever I do speaking at conferences or events, and I say, for me, in order to have effective training, we have to have three things. Okay. And that is, it's got to be engaging, it's got to be educational, and it's got to be entertaining, unless it's not funny. Okay. There's a few things, right? When it comes to a fatality or significant injury, or really bad near miss, that just isn't funny.
Right.
But other than that, for me, if I can keep people engaged, entertained, and education, I think that training was effective.
Yes.
Now, I'm not going to lie. I went through a phase for many years that I was offended that, like, I would teach the OSHA 510 and the OSHA 500, right? I still do from time to time, but less and less. But I would be offended when I trained somebody in an OSHA 510, the standards, and then they came back for the trainer course a few weeks later, and they didn't remember a quarter, a third, a half of what I said. And I was literally, I was like, what happened to y'all? And then I realized it's not what happened to them, it's what happened to me. Because I wasn't educated enough on the cone of retention, right? We have the cone of learning, or rather, we call it the cone of learning, but it's really the cone of retention, right? Okay. And in my opinion, so what happened is I would do those classes. I've trained thousands of people in the OSHA 510, hundreds of people, maybe even 1,000 or more in the OSHA 500 to be outreach trainers for 10 and 30-hour construction, general industry, and maritime. And I expect, and I still do this with some of our training, that when we're done with the conversation, I have an expectation that both of us, regardless of the level of that person coming in, have the same knowledge going out and retention going out. And that's unfair.
That's right.
And that's unfair because of me, not because of them.
Right.
So,
you're now starting to get under the hood of the question that I asked. That really, because again, training, simply standing in front of a group of people and saying a bunch of stuff, whether it's to a standard, an industry standard, a company policy, whatever, is only part of it. It's what's going on inside these folks' head. What are they actually retaining? What are they actually understanding? Because it's difficult to retain stuff you don't understand. And that in and of itself really is the psychosocial hazard. So here's a connection that a psychosocial hazard is a psychosocial factor that's perceived or experienced by the person as a threat to them. And in these cases, there are threats out there to me that I don't even understand because I didn't get the training. I don't realize that, again, back to the trench, example, I didn't know that getting into this thing without a protective system, sloping and benching, or, I didn't realize that. I didn't know anything about the soil. I just got in because the guy told me to get in. You see what I mean? And again, it creates a scenario where there's this physical thing that's going to get me and get me bad, but I don't know it until after I'm injured, until after something bad happens. That's if I survive at all. And then to the supervisor, the other people who are around, who are also exposed to, well, we didn't tell this person. They hopped in this hole in the ground and now they're dead. Speaking of things that aren't funny, that has an emotional impact on everybody. People who see it, people who don't see it, people who've got to deal with the court case, and people, all of those things could have been eliminated by someone simply taking the time to provide the information up front. It could have resolved all that stuff. Mm-hmm. All of it.
Well, and I agree with you, but the problem is, and then is it retained? And then we get, blinders on, right? We all know that I bring a lot of things back to driving, okay? Because I think it's something that we do often, right? And it's also something we do wrong often, right? So I compare it to driving that, first of all, you don't have to score 100 in most DMVs to pass an exam. It's either 70, 75, 80%. So what you're telling me is I can get on the road as long as I know most of the rules, okay, for the driving, for the written or computer portion, right? Unless you had to hook up in your community, you had to take a written or a computer-based test, right? And then you have to take the driving assessment, right? So, and then it goes back to behaviors. And so for me, it's always about knowledge, right? Gain and acquire knowledge, gain, acquire, and perfect the skill, and behavior and performance. So I compare it to driving all the time. So this is where I was going with it, Dr. Daniels, is that most of us know that, but you have to know, right? That you can take a right on red. Well, you remember when you first started driving, you're like, oh, well, people like, go, your friend's in the car, right? You know, go. You can go right on red, right? Until there's a sign that tells you can't go right on red. So right on red has pretty much become accepted practice. Okay. Or it's written, I'm assuming it's written into the laws, right? But I'm not going to go out on a limb and say it is, right? Without verifying it, but, and in each state, right? So, but normally it's right on red after stop. You don't roll it, you stop, right? Unless it's prohibited. Okay, it's not just right on red. It's right on red after stop because it's red. Okay. But when you come to a left turn, people are like, you can go left. It's a one way. No, you can't, man. You know, left is no left turn unless allowed, you know, as far as I'm concerned, right? You know, but everyone says, no, well, it's one way. Well, every major highway is a one way. So why would they have lights? Why wouldn't they just have blinking red lights as opposed to 3 color lights, right? You know, so I tell people this, and I don't know who said it to me, and I think it might have been either James or, like I said, the Mike Sloan, which is the safety manager for the Navy at the time for the Joint Reserve base in New Orleans. And but somebody said, or it might have been some third person I'm thinking of, but they said, you don't know what you don't know until you know don't know it. Yeah. Now, say that 3 times after 3 beers, right? Try that, right? So, but the thing is that we often are guilty of urban legend, and then we're often guilty of, like I used to think people either wanted to comply or didn't. Okay, and that was my ignorance and my arrogance, both, I think, right? But no, there's a bigger one than that. And for me, I was humbled because of situations that I walked into many times. The reason I quit wearing a baseball cap, right, were 2 reasons. I think, first of all, I went to prescriptive glasses and it started bothering me. But that was the second reason. The main reason was, I can't tell you, for the BP oil spill, I was working in South Louisiana and South Mississippi. And I can't tell you how many times I worked into a construction zone as a safety guy with a baseball cap on instead of a hard hat. Right? Because all I would see was the brim when I was driving site to site, right? And I'm jumping out, going to talk to people, and they're like, hey, safety guy, can we wear baseball hats now instead of hard hats? Well, man, after it happens to you 4 or 5 times in a 2-week period, what I did was I put the baseball caps all the way in the hatch of my SUV, and from there on, I kind of quit wearing them as much. And so, but it was very humbling to me because I was one of these people, either people comply or they don't know. Sometimes they don't know at all. And sometimes complacency kicks in.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
You know, and you know, and I'll say this part. So, and then to kind of, you know, not take too much time away from what you'd like to discuss, but a vehicle. How many times do we get in a vehicle? Let's go back to that right turn, left turn, or changing lanes. And, you know, we have a legal duty to signal before we change lanes. And how many times do we miss that? Right now, I'll tell you this, and if you're in New Orleans or Louisiana, Dr. Daniels, right, and you fail to do it, you're probably going to get a citation for a 32:104. Okay, and don't ask me how I know that, but I know that, right? So, and it's a failure to signal lane change, right? But what happens is that on my mind, you know, my wife said, "Man, you need to turn your blinker on," you know, and I'm like, "I did." She's like, "You didn't." Now, sometimes she's been wrong. Right? Sometimes I've been wrong. But what happens is in our mind, it's like an automatic. I think I did it.
Right.
And did I or didn't I? Unless I go back and see the tape, right? If I have a camera in my car, there's no way to prove it or disprove it because at that point you're just going off of what you recall and muscle memory. And as far as your muscle memory, it's telling you did it.
Right.
But it doesn't mean we did.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with FlourishDX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode.
Yeah. Well, and another point to that, not only do we think we did it, or we think we accomplished something in a particular way, but based on our understanding of whatever the conversation is, we tend to hold other people to that same standard because we believe it. So I believe this is a way to do this thing, right or wrong. And then particularly if I'm in a position of authority or to influence other people, then I start telling other people about that. Well, yeah, just go ahead, turn on left. It's okay. But based on what? Well, that's just what I've been doing it for so long and I haven't gotten caught. Nothing bad has really happened. So again, we start to influence other people and it's like we're spreading misinformation. And sometimes we don't even know it's misinformation, again, to your point, because we've either never gotten the correct information or the information that's applicable to that situation, or we forgot, or we never really retained it.
Or we never paid the consequence, right? Like a transportation or a vehicle wreck, right? Absolutely. Or a near miss, a significant near miss. I agree with you 100%.
Right. Absolutely. So you mentioned earlier the kind of, and I'll call it an excuse that organizations use to say that, well, we don't really have time or money for that. So talk to me about your view about time and money as they relate to training.
So this is the first hour of our 10-hour podcast, right?
Right.
I just want to make sure we're straight, okay? No, I think that it's not just training, it's everything. Everything is time and money, And in the end, what is time? Money.
Right.
It always follow the money, right? It always goes back to the money,
right.
And what happens, I think, is that, companies bid jobs, right? But so now let's take it to the client, right? At the client level, and I find more and more clients are doing this now, and I find that many of our contractors and subcontractors, right, are leaning into us for help here, because what happens is in the contract, it says you're going to provide a certain level of training, right? That you have accident prevention procedures in place. So I find what's happening now is that in this situation is that many times now the client is starting to verify that training's in place, especially because of two reasons, I think. Liability management. Well, I'd say three, really. ISO and ANSI. Okay. Liability management, and then government regulation. Okay. Inspections and citations, as far as I'm concerned, right? But it winds up being, in the end, and I agree with this, you parallel your training. Meaning that you do the training right before you do the task. That's the best time to do the training. Like, don't train everybody on lead and asbestos remediation because they may never use it. Mm-hmm. So when's the best time to train this? Right before we do the job, right? It's called paralleling the training. It's just like doing a JSA meeting, right? Or a pre-shift tailgate safety meeting. You and I are well aware that 85 to 95% of all training is informal training, but it doesn't mean it shouldn't be documented.
Right.
It just means that we're not in the desk and a projector, right? At a table and a projector. So what happens, in my opinion, is that a lot of times I think that the employers are doing more training than what we anticipate. They're not properly documented.
Right.
Field interventions, coaching, tailgate safety meetings, stand downs, right? All of this should, when every day you have a JSA, or let's say it's become industry standard, right? To every day have a JSA meeting or some kind of task safety analysis meeting. Well, when we're talking about the hazards of the day, those hazards and those topics that we talked about should be noted on our documentation every day. So I think we actually have more informal training than we realize in the workplace. I just don't think we have as much formal training. Mm-hmm. More sit down or more computer based, right? And it's because time is of the essence. And then I think part of the problem is this, because I used to always blame the employer, right? I did. I was one of these people, employer, right? And I think that's two reasons, right? First of all, because the employer is ultimately responsible. Because if you look at litigation management, who's everybody suing? Trying to sue the employer, right? Depending on whether they can get past comp or not, or the manufacturer of any tool, equipment, material, or chemical. But also OSHA says the employer is responsible, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it is the controlling employer or the exposing employer, whether it's a sub or a controlling contractor, prime, or whatever. But where I see the disconnect is this, is that also the more employers, and this is where I'm going to give the employer the pass, and I think it's a big pass and I understand it now. I'm going to train everyone to a certain level in my organization so that they can be better protected, right? Now I have to pay them more. Because if I don't pay them more, they're going to leave me. And some other employer is going to give them another $1 an hour or $2 an hour because they don't have to invest the money that I invested in training. Now they feel, and it's not true. That employer still has responsibility to retrain that employee, right? But the second employer, third or fourth employer figure, it's turnkey. I got these employees and now I don't have to really train them or train them as much. And it normally tends to be smaller, like small, mid-sized to small employers that often do that, right? Or they're just more knowledgeable and skilled, period. And now the employee is more marketable. So it's kind of a catch-22. And it's, I don't think there's a right or a wrong. I think it just is.
Right.
I think everybody, the employee's right, the employer's right. I think the employee's wrong and the employer's wrong.
Right.
Right. I think it's a little bit of everything.
Right.
And, and I think that's part of the challenge is that, okay, we got to take all these people out of service, right? We have to train them. So we're paying them while we're taking them out of service and training them. And then we're going to lose many of them because now they're going to be more marketable to somebody else.
Well, I find that discussion an interesting one too. And again, getting all the way back to the reason that this podcast is on the air. You're losing people not because somebody's paying them $1 more an hour. You're not losing people because that's not it. There is some other reason, and often it's so psychologically unsafe, they can't tell you what that other reason is. Now, often it's the person that they are working, that they feel like they're working for, and the people that they're working with, and the environment that they're working in. But that, again, because it's so focused on money. We got time, we got all these deadlines because there's this time pressure all the time and there's not a focus on the human beings. You get people who just won't, I don't have time for that because I got a deadline to meet. No, these are human beings, and these human beings, they're different. They have different needs, different interests. And to the extent you can stop, just pause for a minute, invest a little time, because if you invest a little time, you'll save a lot of money. To be quite honest, invest a little bit of time in training, a little bit of time in treating people with dignity and respect and, caring for them just a little bit. You're going to save a bunch on the back end because they will stay. Doug stays because, I can make a little bit more money over there, but this is a really good company. They treat me really well. They got a great safety program. They got a good benefits. I feel like this is family to me. You see what I mean? That's the part that I think some organizations are missing out on. And again, they end up spending not enough today and spend way too much tomorrow because they're not thinking about it in that way.
That's a great point. It absolutely is because, and a lot of times it's usually that supervisor 1 or 2 levels up, right? Or someone who was maybe given a promotion or raise without merit. That they were in the know, right? They were in the in, right? Or somebody who, on the flip side, comes out of school, comes out of some kind of technical program or university program, or has a certain professional certification or training they took, and all of a sudden they leapfrog the line, right? Or they're dropped in on top of us. Well, yeah, they don't know anything. They don't know anything today because they're new to the organization, and they may not know very little about the craft, but they were hired to learn. So I think it goes back to, we can't be resistant to training, right? Because when we become resistant to training in education, right? Whether it's, and I don't care. Well, I don't care whether it's college. I don't care whether it's technical, right? I'm one of these people, and I think you've probably heard me say it on the Strategic Advisory Board meetings for Veriforce, which is, it took me 21 years to get a 4-year degree, right? So
I'm that guy.
Yeah, and I've been talking about a master's for 10 years, right? So So it's not about, I think you have some people that have bachelor's and master's or beyond and do very well, and some that don't. Right. And you have some people that dropped out of high school because they felt they wanted to make money, or maybe they needed to make money, right? Have a GED or a high school degree or neither, and do very good work and make a lot of money, and some that don't,
That's right.
And none of that is intertwined. Those are all separate, right? Education, training, the quality of work you do, the income you make, security you have, all of those are different. They're dynamic amongst each person. Mm-hmm. But what I find is that, and I'm with you, is that a lot of it is behavioral because I think that, let's put it this. If the person's not happy with frontline supervision, right, or above, or they feel that the organization is too demanding, but they're not giving enough, that extra 50 cents or a dollar, or even a dollar less, might make you go, right?
That's absolutely. So
I agree with what you're saying, but
right.
And it's funny you say that because I'll tell you one thing that we're seeing more and more, and I don't know if you are, which is we're getting more and more demand for leadership development and soft skills training.
Yes. Because that is the issue for a lot of places. It really is. We got really good at, so again, particularly since the passage of the OSH Act, we've gotten really good at addressing all the hard skill stuff. So the SAFs are going down, their recordables are going down, all those numbers look good, but there's still this soft thing. We call it soft because it's difficult to put our hands on, but people still don't like working here. They don't like the work that they have to do. They don't like the people that they're working with. It's a feeling. It's not, and I honestly believe that as the United States gets more aware of the importance, again, of psychological health and safety, that we'll start inserting this in places, and it'll actually make our physical training better. It'll actually make because again, if you were to do the investigation of any fatality, I will guarantee you that there was a psychosocial root to it someplace. No, somebody knew that this was wrong. Somebody had a sixth sense that something's not going right. And we've taught people, doesn't matter how you feel, this is what you do. And so even after people come out of training, they have these really rigid, some of the standards are kind of restrictive. The government says we have to do it. But then there's a common sense thing that says the government said we have to do it, but we don't have to kill people. So we need to back away until we can figure that out. See what I mean? So I want to make sure, I want to go back to something that you said as we start to get close to the end, but I don't want to miss out on something that you said earlier. You said that you ended up doing a lot of training because of your ability to speak more than one language. I struggle with the one, so good on you that you can do. But as this podcast episode is being released, it's actually National Hispanic Heritage Month, and so it's really interesting that you have ended up as a trainer in many ways. You got as interested in it because you can do this in more than one language. So talk a little bit about the importance of being able to, speak to people in a language that they understand.
Absolutely. So, well, first of all, you say a language in which we understand, but it could be English and we could be using acronyms, like PEL and REL, right? Like permissible exposure limit and recommended exposure limit by NIOSH. But also, just by saying permissible exposure limit and recommended exposure limit, if an employee doesn't know what we mean, forget the initials. It can be the full sentence, right? And if they still don't understand, well, then why are we sharing the information? So I think that either we need to share what's relevant. And if permissible exposure limits are not relevant to the employee because they don't know how to apply them, maybe we're wasting too much time of that employee, right? Okay, or we need to educate them more so that they understand what a permissible exposure limit is for a chemical or noise or whatever the case is, or a recommended exposure limit or occupational exposure limit by NIOSH, right? And who NIOSH is, right? So that's another thing, right? Okay, so that's just English, period. Now, when we take it into other languages, foreign languages, right? Foreign to U.S. languages, namely Spanish, because we know that our largest working population, I laugh, ask people, what is the second most spoken language in a construction site these days? And I say English, right? Because we have so much Spanish speaking going on, right? But again, chip on my shoulder, right? Or my naivety saying, oh, well, we don't offer enough Spanish speaking training, but we offer way more Spanish speaking training than we do Russian, Vietnamese, Polish, Czech, right? So all of a sudden we have texting, right? We have all these other languages, right? We have all these other languages so we say, oh, well, the Latino worker, because we see the bulk. But what about all these other workers, right, and people in the workplace or volunteers that speak other languages other than English and other than Spanish or other than Vietnamese and don't get nearly as much hazard awareness in their language.
Right.
So I don't think we can capture it all. I really don't think we can, right? So what we have to do, and we can't say, oh, well, so speaking English, and I did a post on this a while back, and it kind of triggered some emotions on people, right? But making English speaking a required skill for employment is legally acceptable. Telling employees that they can only speak English in the work site is not. Okay. So, but if we exclude everybody who is not fluent in English, we don't have a workforce. We are a global economy, right? And especially the US, it is a melting pot of every race, every religion, every gender, right? So we are, our protected classes make us what we are, right? And so what I say is that we can't possibly do every language in every dialect. Right. So I understand that they've gone to the majority, which I used to think that Latino workers didn't have enough access, but they do, because the state of Texas, the state of California, other states as well, all states, but primarily those two states put out a lot of, in New Mexico, put out a lot of information in Spanish. Many organizations have translated information in Spanish. But I'm going to tell you that I think two things. First of all, if we hire someone who doesn't speak English, we need to have at least one other person in that organization that we feel that is fundamentally knowledgeable enough to translate that information for us and foremost, right? Second of all, that's why I'm a proponent of pictograms. You're sitting here doing this, and I know exactly what you mean, and you didn't say a word, right? So that's why pictograms, right, and hand gestures or facial gestures are so important in the workplace. Think about crane. We have hearing protection on, crane and rigging, signal person, look how far away we are. But also, it's opposite, right? I'm holding my left hand up right now, but it's right when it comes. But I'm telling my crane operator to boom right, because I have to give the instructions from the perspective of my receiver when I'm the signal person for a crane operation, not from the signal person.
Right.
So I have to point the right direction, but I have to point the correct direction, right? And tell them to boom right with my left hand, or tell them to boom left with my right hand.
Right.
So let me go back to what I was speaking about earlier, Dr. Daniels, when I said the 7 core elements, right, of a safety management system. What is number 7? Communication and coordination on multi-employer work sites. Forget the multi-employer work sites. Communication and coordination on all work sites.
Right.
And it's impossible to capture every single language. Right. So part of it is, let me go back to, again, we have to get out of this micro view, right? And we have to go to this macro view, because I had to do it, because I said, English speaking employees, Spanish speaking employees, right? Training. Yeah, it needs to be done. Well, what about every other language that's out there? So I have to look at my macro now and say, how do we do this?
Right.
It may be with relay persons, right? Somebody that's knowledgeable enough, or maybe we train that person to be a team leader, the one that speaks 2 languages, right?
Right.
Of each language of whatever our workforce represents. And then Google Translate, not the best in the world, but it will get the message through. Actually, it's gotten much better.
Right.
Okay. I use it now. I write in English. I can write in Spanish, but it's painful. Painful for me, and it's painful for you to watch. So what do? I'll go to Google Translate. I translate it from English to Spanish, and then I amend it. Okay. Because it translates it in Castilian, but most of us in this workplace are Central and South American, North American because of Mexico, right? But North American, Central American, South American, as opposed to Castilian Spanish. Okay? So it's like translating from Spanish to English in the Queen's English, as opposed to U.S. English.
Right.
So there is a difference, right?
Right.
But so I think that namely pictograms, and then verification of communication and coordination, that the message is somehow being understood by that employee.
Right.
And that's part of the challenge.
Yes. Yeah. And again, back to one of your earlier points as well, as we start to conclude, that this doesn't have to be complicated. It really doesn't. Again, I put a lot on employers for the same reason that, the OSHA says that a lot's on the employer, but it's also on the worker as well. because of the 7 or 8 responsibilities the organization has, the employee has one. Follow the rules. But I add another. Take care of yourself. If you don't understand the things that are going to get you injured or killed, then is the money really worth it? You have to ask yourself, is it really worth it? Is it so important to get money that's going to get me killed? Or is it more important to, get enough to be able to meet my needs? But I don't want to die for it. It's not, I don't really, the money's not that important to die for it or to be maimed. And it also doesn't help all the other people I say I'm trying to help, So my mom, my kids, my cousins, uncle, all these people I say, if I get killed, it doesn't help. So it's important on me to understand just enough that doesn't look right. There's something about that I don't understand. And before I just jump into it, to ask the question, say, hey, Doug, I know we didn't necessarily talk about this in class, but what does that thing mean? That kind of looks kind of different to me. And that split second of stop, explain, and have an environment where that's okay, where people can do that. Like, let's not move so fast that people can't ask questions and can't be curious and can't, tap you on the shoulder and go like, hey, can you tell me about that thing again? All of these small, what we consider to be small things, these are small psychosocial hazards that can be mitigated on the spot. Right now, we can fix that right now. The person doesn't understand, we can share with them right now. And we're done. We can move on to some other things and not have a bigger problem down the road. Yeah, no doubt.
I absolutely agree with that.
Absolutely.
I think that part of it, right? Like, and I'd like to add something to that, which is, I think that, again, pictograms, photos, a short video, discussions, right? Because I don't know about you, Dr. Daniels, right? But when I started learning PowerPoint, I don't know, let's call it 20 years ago, right? Or 18 years ago, whatever. When I started using it a lot, you start curly cues, drop-ins, right? Oh, now I'm going to make it fade, right? And because when you don't know content, you try to design a better looking PowerPoint, right? And you try to use all the tools in the toolbox, right? On the ribbon bar, right? So, the more we do, and it's a cut and paste of the whole standard or slide because that's all we know. And we don't want to miss anything, right? Now, I'll have lockout, tagout. I'll have a word up there that says 50 pounds, right? And I have a picture of a zip tie. That's all I need to say the connector, right? And then the tag, it says durable. That's all I have, right? And the tag, I'll be like, it's got to be durable, y'all. Where are we going to put it? Tell me right now. We're going to do lockout, tag. Where are we putting the tag? It's going to be outside. Okay, can it be made of paper? No. Does it have to be poly or some kind of coated? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, now if it's going to be indoors, if it's paper, do you think it'll last? Well, yeah, as long as it's not exposed to heat, as long as it's not good, great, right? And this is, so I have 2 pictures and 2 words, right? So it's a tag and durable, and then it's a zip tie for the tag, and it says 50 pounds. And I say, it's got to hold 50 pounds, right? That's it. That's the only rule. How do you know? Manufacturer says it on the instructions. So buy quality materials, right?
Right.
And then what I do is I pull user manuals. And so I tell people, I break things down to 4 categories. I don't know if this is right or not, but this is my 4 categories, right?
Right.
Tools, equipment, materials, and chemicals. Okay. So those 4 things, every single one of them, if you bought a weed eater, or lawnmower, or a blender, or a sawzall, and either the instructions, most of the time they're still paper, right? Sometimes they're electronic now.
Right.
But it's page after page after page of warning. And I explained this to employees. I said, this is called strict liability. The manufacturer of any tool, equipment, material, chemical, we know that chemical is a safety data sheet and the labels, right? The pictograms. But that is the manufacturer's spec. And I say, the tool, material, chemical, or material, page after page after page of warning, don't do this, don't do that, you must do this. I said, that's called strict liability. That manufacturer has a duty to tell us how this product may harm us, how we must properly use it, inspect it, pull out of service, maintain it, store it, everything else. Doesn't matter what it is. Anytime we violate that, it becomes culpable liability, right? Now it's, culpable, culpa, right, being Latin, and then Spanish, the same word, meaning fault, meaning you start accepting the fault for what you did to yourself or you did to someone else. And that's how, because I used to get offended, right? Because I've come from my 21-year, 4-year degree is in paralegal studies, right? And I worked for a 2-person operation and then went to the biggest firm in Louisiana, actually from Houston to New York, Jones Walker Law Firm. And I got a really great education at both. But what I realized is that, and then with my bachelor's, right, is that from strict liability, where the manufacturer has to tell us, hey, you have to use it like this, inspect like that. If not, you may hurt yourself. That is their duty to tell us that, duty to warn, right?
Right.
But when we fail to follow it, we start shifting that liability from them over to ourselves. So when everybody says, oh, the manufacturer got out of it, no, they should have never been in it. They should have never been in it because we failed to use it. Was it that stupid ladder's fault, or was it your fault that you were hopping the ladder, right, over 3 steps and then wound up, falling over, right? Was it my fault or the stupid ladder's fault, right? It's items like that I tell people. So going back to what we were talking about earlier, what do I stick within? I mean, there's certain standards I stick within, right? The ANSI 490 standard for adult learning, OSHA's recommended training practices of workers. I stick to SHRM or ATD, right? Because I think they're all important standards and they help us better try to perfect our craft as trainers and educators. But also on top of that, what tools I use is as many workshops, discussions, hazard hunts, right? Find this issue, case study. And I try to stay away from PowerPoints, so I try to stay OSHA, not recommended training practices. OSHA says, don't do more than a third of lectures. It's recommended, right? Don't do more than a third of lectures or PowerPoint. Well, they say lectures, but including PowerPoint, is that 2/3 of our training should be activity-based. But that means that our trainers have to be trained to engage the audience.
Yes.
And I think that's a big part of it because in the end, none of us really want to be there. We can be, look, I'd rather be with my family, right, than be in training in most cases, right? I'd rather be doing my job than be in training. So, but if we have to do it, let's at least, us as professionals, figure out a way to engage our audience more, right? And, because we keep on saying the employer doesn't engage them. Well, we got to engage them too.
Yes.
And I think it's really important.
Absolutely. Okay. So if there are folks out there who want to follow up with you, they want to hear more about, just training in general, about you, about what you do, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
Contact Dr. Daniels. He's my agent. No, we, everything that's another part of my business, right? Is that we have to brand. And it's an educational process for me. So everything that we're doing now, because we have multiple organizations because of contractual obligations, I'd rather have one, but it's not possible. So it's like we're like business schizophrenics over here, right? So, but what we've done is we have harmonized all of our training now under one flag. So we go under the handle on YouTube, Channel 4 Training. So our website is channel4training.com. All social media, we're now Channel 4 Training, except for Twitter, because Twitter only accepts 15 characters or 14 characters, and we have 50. You learned this the hard way. We have 15 characters. So it's the little things like that, right? That along the way, right? So if anybody else is doing their own hustle, hey, keep your identity under 14 characters, and it'll fit on all social media as of today. Maybe not tomorrow, but as of today. But no, we fly everything under Channel 4 Training. Or channel4training.com. And that's where we keep all of our, consulting, training, and participate a lot, just like yourself on LinkedIn. I don't like to be on social media. I don't like to be on camera. We've got one of the guys that works with us. He's like, yeah, right. You're always running your mouth. Just because I'm always running my mouth doesn't mean I want to be, in the limelight, right? I mean, a lot of times, let's like this, Dr. Daniels, we go hang out somewhere, right? At the end, I'm in the mix, right? But at the beginning, I'm always standing off, waiting and, kind of trying to scope things out. But no, I mean, we just have to get online more. And I recommend to anybody that's in the industry, anybody, you want to be a leader, you are already an organizational leader, right? A trainer, a consultant, or whatever. We have to get that social media presence out. We are in a digital world. We cannot continue to work analog.
Absolutely right.
And I take that responsibility and that challenge humbly, because there's nothing worse. I like seeing you on camera right now. I don't like seeing myself. Just for the record.
Well, I appreciate you taking time to be on camera with me. As a matter of fact, if you're watching this episode on the Flourish DX YouTube page, please do like, subscribe, and share what you've just seen. If you're listening to the podcast for the first time, welcome. I hope something that you've heard is going to bring you back in the future. We're certainly interested in hearing from those of you who like what you're hearing. You have ideas for future podcasts, for future topics, for future guests. So please reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's the best way to get a hold of me. Previous episodes of this podcast can be found at psychhealthandsafetyusa.com. And that's it. That's all we have. But we'll look forward to hearing and seeing from many of you. And that's it till next time on the next episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Thanks very much.
Tune in each Friday for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to david@id2-solutions.com or go to the Flourish DX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.